A tragic character born from a tragic experience, an abstract exploration of one artist's attempt to process grief adapted into a film that also resulted in tragedy, a franchise forever haunted by ghosts. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of The Crow. Was a feature film released in 1994 based on the indie comic book of the same name. In an era when Hollywood still thought of comic book movies as light, fun, kid stuff, The Crow said, "Hold my absinthe." Is that how goth people talk? People once believed that when someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead. But sometimes something so bad happens that a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the soul can't rest. And sometimes, just sometimes, the crow can bring that soul back to put the wrong things right. It's October 30th, Devil's Night, as hundreds of fires burn throughout the city, fires set by criminals demonstrating that this city belongs to them. Amidst the chaos, police canvass the scene of a brutal double murder, Eric Draven and Shelley Webster, on the eve of their wedding day. 1 year later, Officer Albrecht has done his best to move on from the events of that terrible night and prepare for whatever this year's Devil's Night will bring, because those same criminals, those same murderers from last year, are still out there getting ready to strike. But greater forces are at work as the restless spirit of Eric Draven is delivered back to the world of the living, tethered between realms by a crow that grants him supernatural abilities like face painting, rooftop jumping, and invulnerability. Granted temporary respite from the afterlife to right the horrible wrongs that were done to him and Shelley, to make sure those criminals can't hurt anyone ever again, Eric has come back as an unstoppable force of vengeance. He is the Crow. Thank you to 80stees.com for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description below and use code TOYGALAXY to get 30% off your order today. What's the first thing that pops into your head when I say the 1980s or the 1990s? Don't think about it, just say it. 1, 2, 3. Rubik's Cube. Yes, they have that, or they had that, or they will have that. 80stees.com is constantly refreshing their inventory with officially licensed t-shirts featuring characters, quotes, and logos from cartoons, comics, TV shows, movies, wrestling, and music from the 1970s through the 2000s. So while I can't guarantee that everything you can think of will be in stock, I can guarantee that you'll always be surprised by the range of their selection. 80stees.com has something for everyone. Your favorite heroes like Batman, Spider-Man, Mega Man, Deadpool, and Wolverine, Voltron, both Lion and Vehicle, Star Wars, Stargate, old and older Battlestar Galactica, Motley Crue, Biz Markie, Pink Floyd, and Jimi Hendrix. Find the shirt that's right for you, the one that speaks to your interests, and lets the world know that there's no bigger fan of scratch and sniff stickers, Spam, or Kellogg's Fruit Loops than you. And you can prove it because you're wearing the shirt. Click the link below and use code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order today. Again, that's code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order. And thanks again to 80stees.com. James O'Barr was born in 1960 in Detroit, Michigan. According to the now-defunct official James O'Barr website, his biological mother was in and out of mental institutions, jails, and hospitals, which led to James and his brother growing up in the foster care system. O'Barr turned to art to pass the time and entertain himself. All he needed was something to draw with and something to draw on. Unfortunately, once he and his brother were finally adopted, his parents weren't very supportive of his work.
My adopted parents were blue-collar, hard-working people from down south. They didn't see art as any type of career. It was just kind of a hobby to waste time with. You know, I think they thought drawing was the equivalent of playing cards. You know, it was just something to do. And I don't know, it kind of reached an apex in my teenage years where I was forbidden to draw in the house because I was wasting so much time, and was told to go out and get a real job, which I subsequently had to do, you know, washing dishes at a restaurant or working at the nursing home.
O'Barr continued to draw wherever and whenever he could. He started shopping his portfolio around at comic conventions and working various jobs. At 16, he met the love of his life, Bethany, and at 17, they moved out and got engaged.
I met this girl, and she was like an angel to me. I mean, she was just, you know, absolutely everything I had ever wanted. And I thought, you know, well, I did it. I got to the end of the race. I got, for not caving in, for not surrendering, for, fighting through that 16 years of difficulty. I finally got to the end, and I've got the prize.
At 18, O'Barr got his first professionally published piece in a heavy metal magazine copycat called Gasm, a science fiction piece called Incident on Planetoid 7 that O'Barr says was inspired by A Clockwork Orange.
And we were together for like every day for probably 3 years. And we were engaged, and we were supposed to be married after we graduated. And she was killed by a drunk driver. And I was like pretty much just destroyed. Everything that I had worked for, had been working up to, was wrapped around this person, and suddenly she was gone for no good reason. I mean, it's not like she had an illness or it was something that was anticipated. Just like one day out of the blue, somebody decided to get drunk and drive down a side street at 70 miles an hour, and suddenly she was just gone.
O'Barr did his best to keep moving through life without feeling anything. He briefly joined the seminary before enlisting in the Marines, who were more than happy to put his drawing skill to work re-illustrating outdated combat manuals full of racist stereotypes left over from World War II. Ironically, it was his time in the Marines that exposed him to the art that would influence his work the most. See, as a child, he read comics and spent entire days at the movie theater next to the International House of Pancakes that his mother worked at, watching the same movies over and over again, breaking down their structure and learning about visual storytelling.
But gradually I just, I think music had a lot to do with it. I actually found some musical groups that I felt like were really speaking to me or spoke for me, that where somebody actually understood what I was feeling and validated it, like Joy Division. Joy Division being a main influence on me, and their influence is really prevalent throughout the whole Crow book.
O'Barr had joined the Marines to cope with his grief, and after 2 years was discharged early due to the death of his father. As detailed on the now-defunct James O'Barr official website, he returned to the U.S., quote, with full intent and focus to kill the driver of the van that took Bethany's life, only to find out that the driver was already dead. O'Barr turned once again to his art as an outlet for his emotional pain. He has said that his own tragic loss, combined with a 1979 article about a couple who were senselessly killed for a $20 engagement ring, helped him channel his ideas into the character and story that would become The Crow. As O'Barr described it to the Kansas City Star in 1994, quote, I thought it'd be a catharsis if I could channel all this anger and frustration onto paper, and it turned out the exact opposite. I was narrowing my vision to the point where that was all I could concentrate on, and every page became a little death. O'Barr shopped The Crow around to publishers as early as 1981 with no one expressing interest, which didn't really surprise O'Barr, as he did consider it more of a personal project than a commercial one. O'Barr worked as a mechanic while he continued to write and draw the comic. The Crow made his first appearance on the back cover of Caliber Press's Caliber Presents #1 in November of 1988. That was followed by the first issue of The Crow in February of 1989. Shortly after that, O'Barr met science fiction author and screenwriter John Shirley. As Tim Burton's Batman continued to rake in ticket sales and merchandise dollars, Shirley was looking for an artist to illustrate his own cyberpunk novel called Black Glass to make it easier to pitch as a film to studios. Working with producer Jeff Most, they were referred to O'Barr through a writer in the Detroit Free Press who had seen his work on The Crow. Shirley and Most liked what they saw in The Crow. While The Crow wasn't in any way inspired by the success of Tim Burton's Batman in 1989, it certainly had the potential to appeal to the same audience. They assured O'Barr they would remain true to his vision, going so far as to insist on an R-rated production. Meanwhile, New Line Cinema attempted to jump the line, offering a more lucrative deal. They wanted to buy The Crow in its entirety from O'Barr, but it would go forward as a PG-13 project because, no one would be crazy enough to make an R-rated comic book movie, right? Right? O'Barr turned New Line down and worked with Shirley and Most through multiple drafts before they found a version that worked. Since the Writers Guild rules wouldn't allow a producer to have a writing credit, the final screenplay is credited solely to Jeff Most. Most teamed up with fellow producer Ed Pressman, who brought in writer David J. Scow to bring the script closer to its final form. For a director, they focused on music video directors and found Alex Proyas, who had done some independent film work, but also a bunch of TV commercials and stuff at MTV. Paramount Pictures got the distribution rights and scheduled a release date in August of 1993.
In a world without justice, one man was chosen to protect the innocent and make the wrong things right. The critics are unanimous. They're calling The Crow the best movie of its kind since Batman. 4 stars. Spectacular and visually mesmerizing. Rolling Stone raves, Brandon Lee is sensational, dazzling and fiercely hypnotic. Brandon Lee, The Crow, rated R. Now playing at theaters everywhere.
River Phoenix and Christian Slater were both in the running to star as Eric Draven, but it was Brandon Lee who ultimately convinced O'Barr that he was the right person for the role. Lee hadn't been in many movies at that point, and O'Barr thought he was more suited to being an action hero. Born in 1965, Brandon Lee was, of course, the son of Bruce Lee, world-famous actor and founder of the martial art Jeet Kune Do. He was only 8 years old when Bruce died suddenly of what was assumed to be cerebral edema or swelling of the brain caused by kidney failure. Please note, I'm not a doctor and I am heavily, grossly summarizing 60 years of research and medical analysis.
But was it a natural progression for you to go into films?
Well, I always wanted to go into films. I didn't really plan necessarily on going into martial arts films, and this film, Rapid Fire, is my first time out of the box in a leading role.
Right.
So I don't mind doing them, but I'd like to be able to have the versatility of somebody, you know, like Mel Gibson, for example, who gets the chance to do a big action film, but then also step off and do, you know, Hamlet finally one day.
Bruce's legacy followed Brandon as he pursued his own career in acting, with everyone understandably making comparisons to Bruce and his status as a global icon. In the end, Brandon was the only person offered the role of Eric Draven and immediately became a close friend and collaborator on the film with O'Barr beginning in 1992, nearly a year before filming began. According to producer Jeff Most, Brandon was involved at every level from script to production and development. Lee co-choreographed and did most of his own stunts. He reshaped his body, losing 20 pounds to more accurately embody the visual Iggy Pop-inspired appearance of the character from the comics. Sophia Shyness was cast as Shelley Webster, Ernie Hudson as Officer Albrecht, Rochelle Davis as Sarah. Michael Wincott as Crime Lord Top Dollar, David Patrick Kelly as T-Bird, Lawrence Mason, Angel David, and Michael Massey as Tintin, Skank, and Funboy, respectively. By the end of March 1993, most of the filming was completed. Lee was looking forward to his wedding, scheduled shortly after production wrapped. The real physical work was done. All that was left was the before scenes, when Draven was an aspiring musician living with his fiancée and their cat, Gabriel. On March 31st, while filming a flashback scene where Eric Draven is shot by Funboy, a gun that was supposed to be loaded with blanks accidentally discharged a projectile. It's a scenario that seems too far-fetched to believe, beginning with the firearms supervisor who worked the rest of the film not being on set that day. The gun, which had been fired in a previous scene, had a projectile accidentally lodged in the chamber. When the gun was then reloaded with blanks and then fired, enough force was created to dislodge the projectile in the chamber and propel it out of the gun. Lee was taken to a nearby hospital and, despite all efforts to stabilize him, died 6 hours later. The shooting was officially called an accident due to negligence, and Lee's mother sued the production, settling 2 months later. Terms were never disclosed. Everyone involved in the production thought the right move was to stop. How could they possibly carry on after an incident like that? But it was Lee's fiancé and his mother who both suggested they complete the film as a tribute to Lee and the amazing work he did to bring the story to life. Paramount Pictures opted out due to delays in production and the additional costs they were going to incur to finish it, including cutting-edge digital compositing that would be necessary to complete several shots. On top of that, a film that already seemed pretty violent looked worse so in light of Lee's death. Miramax stepped in to provide an additional $8 million, bringing the total budget to roughly $23 million. Additional writers were brought on board to restructure the narrative to fit the scenes they had and the scenes they could still assemble.
When the accident occurred, it was unbearable. And I think the first reaction was, we can't go on. But the performance itself was done, and I felt compelled to finish this work as a legacy to Brandon.
The most difficult scene is this 5-second shot of Lee returning to his apartment. It is crucial to the plot, but it was never filmed. Fortunately, this footage of Lee in a rainy alley was.
Of course, there was very limited footage of him without makeup.
A shot of the empty apartment becomes the background.
Then it was also necessary for us to add some drips of rain in his apartment to make it look as if it was
leaking through
the roof.
Right.
Then, with the aid of computers, Brandon Lee walks into a scene he never really shot.
Other shots involve filming a scene with a body double for Lee, and later mapping the actor's face onto the double's body.
If I move it like this.
To be clear, the footage of Lee's death is not used in the film in any capacity, and, according to most reports, was immediately seized and destroyed at the conclusion of the investigation. James O'Barr was inspired by the goth music scene when he wrote and drew the original comic in the early 80s. It heavily influenced the look and feel of the books, and that same sensibility was fully realized for the film in the 90s. The soundtrack was chock full of gothic and alternative rock bands like The Cure, Machines of Loving Grace, 9 Inch Nails covering Joy Division, the Jesus and Mary Chain, My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, Rage Against the Machine, Rollins Band, Violent Femmes, and Stone Temple Pilots. The song It Can't Rain All the Time, which is performed by Eric Draven's band The Hangman's Joke in the film, was recorded by Jane Siberry for the soundtrack, co-written with composer Graham Revell. Revell also composed the rest of the score. The Crow was originally slated to open in August of 1993. Lee's death and subsequent reconstruction of the film pushed it back almost a full year to Friday, May 13th, 1994. A little on the nose, but that's in the past, I guess. It made nearly $12 million on its opening weekend, the highest ever for a Miramax film, over $93 million total worldwide when it completed its run in theaters. The lives of the production crew were never the same, but the franchise moved on. The Crow, City of Angels was released just 2 years later in 1996, written by David S. Goyer, directed by Tim Pope. Technically taking place in the same world as the first film, the only returning character is Sarah, who is now an adult. City of Angels follows a new soul guided back to the land of the living, this time to avenge his and his son's deaths. O'Barr and Goyer had originally insisted on a female Crow for the sequel, trying to make it as different from the original as possible, but producers Bob and Harvey Weinstein shot that down, suggesting that no one would see an action movie with a female lead. Pope had such a miserable experience working with the Weinsteins that he stopped directing movies for nearly 20 years. 2 years later, in 1998, The Crow, Stairway to Heaven made its way to television, starring my good friend Mark Dacascos, essentially a reboot of the franchise retelling the Eric Draven story from the beginning. One season of 22 episodes aired through May of 1999. The Crow returned in 2000 with The Crow Salvation. Eric Mabius starred as new Crow Alex Corvus, a man framed for the murder of his girlfriend and sentenced to death. He gets Crow powers to get his revenge against the 5 cops who were actually responsible. Due to the poor performance and reception of Crow City of Angels in 1996, Salvation was released direct-to-video. In 2005, The Crow Wicked Prayer cast Edward Furlong as the new Crow murdered by a satanic biker gang. It played in theaters for 1 week before being released to video. It would be nearly 20 years before another attempt at a feature film. That was The Crow, released earlier this year, 2024. It purports to be based on the original O'Barr comic, which brings us back to the original characters with Bill Skarsgård as Eric Draven. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I couldn't make sense of the plot descriptions that I read, so I'm not even going to try to explain it to you. It was panned by critics and bombed at the box office, making back less than half of its $50 million budget. The Crow, the original Crow, the 1994 movie, is still the pinnacle of the franchise on film and television, the truest adaptation with the most direct input from James O'Barr, and unfortunately, the one haunted by the most tragedy, both imagined and real. Michael Massey, the actor who played Fun Boy and pulled the trigger of the gun that killed Brandon Lee, carried the emotional burden for the rest of his life. Before he passed away in 2016, he explained that he never fully recovered. The best he could do was move on.
I don't think you ever get over something like that and say, no, I've gone through it a lot and things keep changing. I know Brendan's fiance now who's married to somebody else and has a little girl, and I see she shops in this store, at my wife's store, and I see her in the park with a little girl, and I you know, I get all sorts of joy and thoughts about that, and it's not Brendan's kid, and you just keep on going. You know, life is extraordinary and very resilient, you know, and you take the good where you see it, you know, and that's how I have.
O'Barr admitted that writing and illustrating the original Crow comics likely left him in a worse place emotionally than he had been before he started, but meeting Brandon and becoming friends helped alleviate some of that pain. As he told the Boston Phoenix, quote, "I relived the same pain and anger as before. I wished I had never written the thing, and I felt like, when is God gonna give me a break? When Brandon died, I felt like, is God trying to test my limits or what? Why let me become best friends with the guy and take him senselessly from me? God is a bastard, if there is one." O'Barr felt like the money he'd earned from the film was dirty, and he donated most of it to causes that helped ease his mind. He has since come to a degree of closure with his childhood trauma, the tragic loss of his fiancée, the creation of the Crow, befriending and grieving Lee, moving on, finding new love and new life. Brandon Lee never got to see how successful the Crow has been or how he is still seen as the embodiment of the character, how the film communicated the pain, anger, and guilt of survivors, but also the hope for the future.
There's this wonderful quote from the book Sheltering Sky, where he says, "Because we do not know when we will die, We get to think of life as an inexhaustible well, and yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood, an afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it? Perhaps 4 or 5 times more, perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20, and yet it all seems limitless.
Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy. Several different tiers to address your specific Secret Galaxy content needs. Check out our new Secret Galaxy merch shop at secretgalaxy.shop. All merchandise is physically in stock and ready to ship. Links to all of this in the description below, and let us know in the comments down below if the 1994 Crow movie bled into every aspect of your life at the time. Despite being an avid comic book reader, I never read the Crow comics, but the movie really hit me right in the demographics. From music to visual style, spectacular violence, it was everything I was looking for from a film that was taking the medium seriously. I didn't go so far as to dress up like the Crow or paint my face or anything like that, but boy did I draw a lot of sullen ninjas with birds on their shoulders. I should have put a bird on my shoulder for this.
Cut.